CFS stands for cubic feet per second.
That is correct. It's one foot by 1 foot by 1 foot every second going over the dam.
So roughly you have 420 cubic feet per second
That's correct.
coming over at any given time.
So that's what we can utilize. Everything else that we can't utilize as part of the power production spills over the spillway.
Okay, got it. And how are you at the effect of dams upstream? I mean, what impact, for instance, does Glen Lake have on you?
Glen Lake essentially has little impact to us unless they open up their gates or they turn a unit on or off, but there's really minimal amount of impact to us. Essentially what comes down is whether it's by release from the core or unregulated stream flow from rainfall, essentially is distributed over the spillway. One other feature I forgot to mention to you on the spillway is that we do have a notch gate that's essentially an extension of the flashboards. And during normal season, we pass a certain amount of flow over there for fish passage, for downstream fish passage. During flood events, we raise that so it will react similar to a flashboard.
What happens just the opposite if in periods of droughts where we might have a long, dry summer and the water level drops? I mean, how does that impact you? And is there anything that you can do? Do you call somebody upstream and say, would you let some more water out? Or how do you coordinate, in fact, when it's very dry or in a drought condition?
That's a good question. During the drought conditions, which is a typical summer, where there is less flow that comes down the river than we can generate, we shut the unit down and do not generate. We do not produce any electricity. And whatever comes in, and we're a run-of-river facility. In other words, whatever water appears into our impoundment, that's what's got to pass. So if there's only, for example, 5 CFS that comes down the river, essentially that 5 CFS is distributed across the top of the flashboards.
John, again, a couple more questions about the boards. I notice, again, they're not there, and they fail, or in a sense, they're part of the safety guard. They fail, and obviously they can't be removed. I mean, could you share some of the history of what's happened in the past with the boards and their impact on water flow?
Certainly, Ivan. Flashboards are put in place once we have control of the river, which is less than our hydraulic capacity. And what you'll be seeing here very shortly within the next week, we'll probably end up putting the flashboards up. Essentially, what we end up doing is being able to draw it down just a few inches below the dam crest and putting pins in essentially holes within the dam, pin sockets. And once they're in place, the flashboards are attached to those pins. And that's where they stay until a high water event. And when we talk about them, what we want to say is they trip, they go down. It's not really a failure. A failure of a flashboard is when they don't trip. What we wanted to indicate, though, is that those only trip when the water levels get above about 1.5 feet to about 2 feet above the boards in order to push them out. Once they're up there and we are under a flood condition or a high water event that's greater than our hydraulic capacity, we have no capability of removing those particular flashboards.
So if I understand you correctly, the flash boards would be about 32 inches higher than the top of the dam. That would raise the level of the water upstream 32 inches, and there would have to be an additional almost 2 feet before the boards failed. So you'd be approaching, it's possible that there'd be 4 or 5 more feet of water upstream before these boards were to fail. So that would be a correct statement?
As of today's conditions, it's 33-inch boards that we have installed at this particular site.
I want to introduce James Gallagher. Jim is here from the DES from Concord, and he's going to share some of his perspective and some information from DES. So I'd like to introduce you to James Gallagher.
Thank you, Ivan. Again, my name is Jim Gallagher. I'm the Chief Engineer at the Department of Environmental Services and Chief of the Dam Bureau. And I'm not sure if John can get into this, but this dam is actually owned by the state of New Hampshire. And we lease it to an L, to John's firm, and they generate hydropower, and they pay us rent based on how much energy they generate, the revenue they get from the energy they generate at this facility. And we use that money that we get from rent, and we rent out this facility and 11 others. We use that money to maintain all the dams that the state owns, and there's 273 of those. So that's the funding source for our dam maintenance fund.
I understand that the DES has 4 levels of categories, safety categories for dams. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think 1 is the lowest safety risk, and 4 would be the highest. It would be a critical risk for people downstream. What is the category for this dam?
Well, Ivan, actually now we have it's sort of a plain speaking type classification system. We used to have a letter classification system where it would be A, B, and C. We've gone now to plain speaking. It's either a non-menace dam or a low hazard dam, and that used to be what we call a Class A dam, or a significant hazard dam, that used to be called a Class B dam, or a high hazard dam. And this is a high hazard dam, and it really is a function that has nothing to do with the condition of the dam. It's simply what would happen downstream if this dam were to fail. This dam, if it were to fail at certain floods, if this dam failed today, what we call a sunny day failure, it would not cause that much damage downstream. I mean, you'd have a wall of water for sure, and you'd have some overtopping of some streets down in Manchester. But the greater problem is if we have a flood a little bit higher than we had back on Patriots Day. And if the dam were to fail when the water is already high downstream, then the additional water would inundate homes downstream. And we say if it gets up into the first floor of those homes downstream, it could cause loss of life. And if it does cause loss of life, or it has that potential to cause loss of life, then we call it a high hazard dam. And this is classified as a high hazard dam.
Thanks for that information. But, of course, our interest in this program came about when Goffstown, there was a meeting at Goffstown talking about flood issues in Goffstown. And personnel associated with this dam came up to and approached Goffstown Television to talk about it. But that damage that occurred is upstream. It did not occur because of a failure from this dam or anything. It was independent of that. So the flooding issues upstream are independent of any failure of this dam, so to speak.
Well, it is. As I said, some of your viewers may have been at that meeting where we tried to explain the causes. It really is a function of just how much inflow came into this structure. They are on this leg, on this impoundment, but we have limited discharge capacity here. It's through this power penstock. It's through the waste gates. Those were all open and operating during the event. And then when the flow exceeds the capacity of those 2 outlets, then it has to come over the spillway, as you see here.